And we are going to introduce our speaker for tonight. This is Pat Byington, and Paul Freeman, one of our board members of Francis Shades Creek, is going to introduce you.
Thank you, Michelle. Welcome everybody to the Thursday evening talk. We're really pleased to have Pat Byington be our speaker tonight. I've got a bio of his, and I'm going to read from it, but also I'm going to ad-lib a few things, I think. So Pat's is a longtime conservationist, over 25 years of environmental advocacy here in Alabama and across the southeastern U.S. He's got a degree in environmental studies and I believe a concentration in ecology from the University of Alabama. We won't say quite how long ago, but it's enough that he still gets credit for long-term. So he's been a longtime conservationist, former executive director at the Alabama Environmental Council and Wild South. He's the publisher of Bama Environmental News for more than 18 years. Career highlights included playing an active role in the creation of Alabama's Forever Wild program, which we're all extremely appreciative of. The creation of the Little River Canyon National Preserve, the Duggar Mountain Wilderness, and preservation of special places throughout the East through the Wilderness Society and the strengthening the state's Alabama cancer risk and mercury standards. Other positions he's had have been, he's been on the board of trustees for Forever Wild. He's been vice chair of the Alabama Environmental Management Commission. He's presently a chair of the board at the Alabama Environmental Council. He's one of the original staffers at Birmingham Now, which has 6 years has become the largest digital publication in the state of Alabama with nearly 500,000 monthly readers statewide. He's the content director there. And, I think he might even claim occasionally to get out on the pitch on a soccer field or in the goalie. And I don't know if you even do some refereeing, but we appreciate everything Pat's done, and we thank him for being our speaker tonight. Pat, anything you want to add? Otherwise, we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I don't actually play soccer goalie anymore because when I turned 50, which was 6 years ago, as many of y'all may know, if you're over 50, the very first question the doctor asks you on your annual checkup is, have you fallen in the past year? And if you're playing goalkeeper, you look at them and you say, you mean last week? So it's but I referee a lot. I actually referee 250 games a year now. So.
Wow. Amazing.
So, are you ready for me to start?
Did you have anything else, Paul?
No, please, Pat, go ahead. We'll turn this over to you, and we appreciate you want to introduce your talk, and we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Super, Ed. Thank you. And first of all, thank you to everyone. I've never done this before, given a speech sitting down, on a Zoom. So if I seem a little uncomfortable or whatever, and we will need to share our screen in a second. But
tell me when you're ready.
And we did a quick little run through, so that worked when Michelle and I did that. First of all, I want to tell y'all, I've been doing environmental and conservation in Alabama for now, it's going on, 34 years. I started at the University of Alabama. We actually had protests against styrofoam at the University of Alabama. Many of y'all may have heard of a professor there named Ed Passerini. He was my mentor, and he was a true activist. He was sort of like a Carl Sagan kind of guy, a futurist, and just a wonderful fellow. He passed away a couple of years ago. Many folks may not know that because of all the COVID stuff. But just to give y'all just a little additional brief bio is in my background is I was very fortunate. I went out to Oregon and I worked out there for the Oregon State Public Interest Research Groups. I came back. I brought my wife back from the state of Oregon. She was a University of Oregon grad, and we've been here ever since, which is wonderful. And I was at age 23, the executive director of the Alabama Conservancy. And it was there, I was able to cut my teeth, and we really had a renaissance back then, I think, in conservation. The 20th anniversary of Earth Day was a huge moment, I think, in the history of this country, and in Alabama especially. And in a few years, we were able to pass, in 1992, Forever Wild, the River Canyon National Preserve. We were able to do lots of great things. And I was able to work on the wilderness, on Dogger Mountain Wilderness, and a lot of projects. And in the 2000, I left the Environmental Council to go to the Wilderness Society, and then I got to work all over the East, which is wonderful, from Maine all the way to Alabama and Florida. And so preserving places. And all during this time, I was on the Forever Wild board, and really was part of help getting it started on the board. And then I got this one position, which was on the Alabama Environmental Management Commission, and many of y'all may know about that, where we had the wonderful challenge of trying to reform the Environmental Management Commission. I did get used to being outvoted 6-1 a lot, but that happens, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight in the presentation. Other than that, my biggest thing, I want to make sure my boss is wonderful. She's Cindy Martin. She's on the Black Warrior Riverkeeper board. She used to be chair too, and she and I, we together. It's her baby. BHAM Now was started 6 years ago. I jokingly say I was employee number 2. There was another fellow who was hired with me and right before me. And as many of y'all may know, I write a little bit about everything. And last month I wrote actually about Shades Creek, and thanks to Paul and Jim, I was able to put some context in about what's going on at Shades Creek, and just a small portion, and that's obviously the Brookwood Village part, and the changes we could have. With that all said, let me talk a little bit about, we can start the slide.
Okay, we'll start the slides. I also want to ask our audience, can everyone hear okay out there? All right, that's great. Fantastic. Okay, we are going to do share screen.
This will be great because you don't have to see my face all the time.
All right, so here we go.
Everybody knows who this guy is, so I'm going to start with a story. And many of y'all may have heard of this story before, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. One of the most important moments in the conservation movement in this country most likely occurred in the late 1800s, when John Muir convinced President Teddy Roosevelt to come up to California and see Yosemite and see all the wonders of that area. And you want to talk about a pretty radical thing. It would never happen today, in which the President of the United States travels cross country. And back then, can you imagine that? It was all by rail, obviously. But Roosevelt wanted to see this incredible person and wanted to meet. He was sort of like a prophet. And so the story goes, and many of y'all may have heard this story, but the story goes is that he got to be alone with John Muir, and they did it for 3 days. And if anybody has ever seen video or the films of Roosevelt, or checked out his writings and things like that, everybody will tell you he was just a chatterbox. He was a fellow who he knew a lot, and he would tell a lot. And he was very, it was rare to be quiet. But when he got up to the mountains there, the story goes is that Muir had him. He had captured Roosevelt. He couldn't go anywhere, and he began to just tell the tale of the wonders that were around him and why these places that where he was and where they were needed to be preserved forever. And Roosevelt, again, who was known to be a fellow who would talk a lot and things like that, just was just captured in they said enraptured. It was incredible to such an extent that I love always when you read the book by Stuart Udall, which details this story. When they did finally go to bed, and they didn't go to bed, they actually went to bed on the ground. They didn't even have a tent. They just slept on the ground. And when they did that, when they woke up that very morning, they were covered with like a half inch of snow. And everybody was freaking out down the mountain. They're all going, "Oh my God, the president's up there. It's been snowing," all these things. Not Roosevelt. Roosevelt, who was just in love with the words and with what Muir was conveying, he could have stayed there forever, despite the snow, despite the weather. And so the story goes is that when he walked down the mountain with Muir and everybody saw the president coming back, and they never talk about whether it was Secret Service or not, but when he came down with this mountain man and this, in a sense, this prophet, this environmental prophet, Roosevelt exclaimed to everyone who could hear it, and he said, I made it more to today, but he said, "Gentlemen, I've had the grandest day of my life." And he literally yelled it. He was so overtaken. Now, with that all said, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the environmental movement and what we do in Alabama, and in my opinion, what we can do to help us succeed in conservation and environmental matters in the state of Alabama. With that said, I want to say this. I think in the environmental movement in the state of Alabama, we have lost the fine art of winning environmental victories in the state. And the fine art of winning and convincing people to be on our side. We need to go one more over.
Okay.
The fine art is storytelling. The fine art is making all. There was something that came up, and I don't know, it was over here. And we'll be doing the next slide pretty quickly. We need to, in the state of Alabama, I genuinely believe we have lost the fine art of making the environment personal. And I cannot tell you how important that is. And it can be, and what I'm going to talk to y'all tonight is genuinely how we can make it personal. And it doesn't have to be, like John Muir and taking a president on a hike. It's a lot more than that. It's conveying what you have in your spirit and soul. And we just don't do that anymore. I joke a lot with folks is that we've gotten really into talking about the regulations and the rules. And I love to make the story, tell the story that everybody loves talking about TMDLs, for example. All right, total daily maximum load.
Whatever that is.
Whatever that is. If you say that, you've lost your audience. And we're doing that too much, in my opinion. I think we need to tell people the reason it's not total daily maximum loads. We have too much dirt in the water. We have too much poison in the water. Let's make it simple, because when we say things like TMDLs, or we say things like, you know, for air quality, ozone and things like that, and particles, pollution and things like that, we just need to bring it down to people, to their level. So, so let's hope we can get this next one. There it is, right there. So you just go boom, right there. So I'm gonna try to go over these pretty quickly because I've got several stories, and I hope everybody knows who this is. This is Mary Burks. She was the founder of the Alabama Conservancy, and she's also been called the mother of the wilderness movement in the state of Alabama. Most people may not know is that you know, when she passed away in, I think it was 2007. A few years later, her accomplishments were so significant that she was named to the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame, which is an extraordinary thing. In fact, just another piece of information, there's another woman named Blanche Dean, who was everyone's heard of the Blanche Dean Wildflower Society. She was also named to the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame. But Mary was wonderful, and I was very fortunate to get to know her. I was an executive director in '89, and I was very young and impressionable. And I got to cut my teeth with her. She and Bob Burks, y'all probably remember Bob too, lived till 100 years old. Bob and she would come to the office at the Alabama Conservancy, and they would just literally stuff envelopes all day. Bob would work on, he was the treasurer, so he did all the treasury work, and we just did that kind of stuff. But she would always tell me stories about how do you make an impact. And I will say, I've never heard any regulatory talk or anything like that from Mary. It was always simple. It was always simple. And the story of her really comes, you know, to the time, which I know I'm going to miss some things, but my two favorite stories is how we created the Sipsey Wilderness in the state of Alabama, which I think was the launch pad for the environmental movement in the state of Alabama. Most people don't know that back in 1970, there were really only two conservation groups in the state of Alabama. I'm sorry, 1970, there were three. And that was the Alabama Wildlife Federation, the Birmingham Audubon Society, and then the Alabama Conservancy, which was this upstart group started by Mary Burks and Bob and several other people. And it was created in 1967 by Audubon members who pretty much wanted to do conservation. You know, Birmingham Audubon was pretty much a bird watching group at the time and pretty much didn't do conservation. So they got started, and their very first issue, I got to tell you all this, everybody's heard of the Dismals. That was their very first issue, was to save the Dismals. And so they took the name Alabama Conservancy because at that time, the Nature Conservancy was not as huge as it is, and you could do it. There was no chapter in Alabama, and back then they took that name. They also, the state next door, Georgia, took that name too, and there's still a Georgia Conservancy. But back to Sipsey, I don't know if you all know the story of the Sipsey. In a nutshell, there were plans to the beautiful Sipsey, the untouched area that we know of today. Back in around 1970, there were three biologists who discovered little markings on trees. I don't think it was markings. I'm sorry, they had little, you know how people put tape around to, you know, mark trees that they're going to cut. And they saw that, and these three biologists, one pretty much everybody may know, he later on became the president of the University of Alabama, Joab Thomas. but the other was Dr. Rogers, who was a biologist, and Charles Prigmore, who was actually a social worker, doctor. But in a nutshell, they discovered that this area was slated to be clear cut. And they came to the Alabama Conservancy at the time because it was the only group around. And they said, we've got to do something. And do something they did. They literally cobbled together the group. They all looked at the maps as we all do on these kinds of things. I know y'all done this with Shade's group. And then they mapped out a plan, and they said, let's not just say don't cut, let's make this a wilderness area. And what was wonderful about this is that, and I always say it's wonderful because they didn't know they were doing anything special. When the Wilderness Act passed in 1964, it was literally passed, and at least according to the Westerners, for people out west. That be something that was hundreds of thousands, if not millions of acres. They never thought and never imagined having wilderness in the East. But the wonderful thing is that this group in Alabama didn't know better. And they didn't know that you can't have wilderness in the East. So they did all they could to say that literally we're only talking about 15,000 acres at the time. As many of y'all know, the Sipsies now, I think, 30,000 acres. But they only wanted 15. And they went to the Forest Service. They just said, get away. That's something we don't do. And these folks all coalesced together and they did things that you would never do. They went to George Wallace. They went to the two senators and they sold it and relentlessly. And Mary Birch wasn't an expert. She just loved the trees. She just loved the forest. She was absolutely not an expert. And they knew that. And they didn't, it didn't matter. And so they literally got the senator at the time, I think it was Allen who did it. They got him to sponsor an Eastern Wilderness Bill in the state of Alabama, 15,000 acres. 15,000 acres.
Wow.
And when that happened, everyone, it was like a domino effect. Everybody else in national forests throughout the eastern United States said, well, if they're going to do it in Alabama, we can do it. Especially, look at them. They got their two senators behind it, and they got George Wallace. I mean, for crying out loud, if they can do it, we can do it.
Amazing.
And so that's what happened is, and let me throw out some names of people. One of the things they did was they used all their friends who were experts, but the experts did just those simple things. So, for example, everybody's heard of Mike Howe at Sanford. Mike Howe did a study on all the fishes of the Sipsey in this piece of area. Alberta Reed, who's still around, who's also one of the founders of the Alabama Conservancy. She did her little part, which was that she actually helped produce a video of all things. I've got old video of people walking through the Sipsey back in 1970.
I will have to get a copy of that.
Yeah, I need someone to fix it. But we've got video and where they would go to every garden club, go to every organization, you name it. And so it's that kind of passion. And this was a passion for 15,000 acres. And eventually, it was 9,000 acres that we preserved, not even 15, not even 10. It was one of the smallest, but today there are millions upon millions of acres in the Eastern Wilderness. I think the latest number is about 3.5 million acres. When in 1970, when this little group in Alabama started, knowing no better, and 0.
That's a great story. How inspiring.
So one last story about Mary, which is I always remember, and this is when I was there, is Don Siegelman, who was always a supporter of conservation and things like that. It's one other thing Mary loved was wildflowers, and she just wanted the roads to be, blooming with wildflowers everywhere. And I always remember this, and this what is part of this, of making it personal and making all this personal, and through our hearts on conservation. And that is, Mary had a meeting with the governor, and her idea was really simple. She just brought a whole bunch of wildflowers to the governor's office and put it on the tables and on his desk. I mean, he looked like a wildflower. It was wonderful. If you ever talk to anyone in the Siegelman administration at that time, they will tell you, what about those wildflowers? It's something they always remember. And she got everything she ever wanted from him because of that. Next slide, then. I'm going to talk a little bit, give you another story about this and why we need to start doing it's not just storytelling. We do need to go back to our roots and then go back to the John Muir, Teddy Roosevelt roots. And so I'm sorry you got the back of them here, but on the right here is Pete Conroy, and on the left is Tom Bevel, and in the middle is a guy named Destry Jarvis, and he actually became head of the National Park Service. And they're talking about the creation of Little River Canyon. That picture was probably taken in about 91 or 92 when we were pushing for the creation of the national park back then. And I don't know if y'all know this, but the national park up there, that should never have happened. And the reason it should never have happened was, Alabama Power had to have the land bought from it. I mean, we had to cobble together something like $7 million, the federal government did, to buy it from them. The politics weren't there. Hal Heflin was totally against preserving anything. You may not believe it, but he was never a friend of the environment and opposed us on everything we ever did back then. And Richard Shelby just didn't care. But you had Tom Bevel, and the good news for us was he knew he was going to retire in about 2 years. This was probably his last rodeo, and he wanted the wilderness area there. I'm sorry, he wanted the national park at Little River Canyon. I mean, we're talking about the deepest canyon east of the Mississippi. But he also knew there were problems. I don't know if y'all knew this, but that canyon was notorious for people in Birmingham to steal their cars and to dump, take everything out of that car, the tires and the engine and everything, and to dump the shell of it in the canyon. It was also a high crime area. It was considered, that area of the canyon was the highest crime area in DeKalb County. High, by far. People would grow marijuana in the canyon, is what I'm told. And then there'd be drug deals everywhere because it was dark and it's a great place to do terrible things. So as the last place that would be a national park. But people don't know this. My dear friend Pete Conroy, he got things started by in 1990. He and Richard Lindsay, who just retired as a state legislator after 30 years, he and Richard Lindsay and some other folks got together and they used Apache helicopters to pull the shells of those cars out of the canyon. They gathered 150 cars from the canyon.
Oh my gosh.
Now, when you've done something like that, you have a story to tell, don't you?
Yeah.
And then the people get to understand that this is serious stuff, what we're doing. We care about this canyon. And the beautiful thing is Bevel said, let's make this a national park. And everybody laughed at him, but another thing happened that was maybe just by circumstance. If you ever get a video and go to YouTube and write this down, pass it on down. It's a song by the group Alabama, Pass It On Down, or maybe Pass It Down. And when you see that video, you're going to sit back and go, whoa, this is something. And it was a song by the group Alabama. And Randy Owen, who I may add is a Republican, was singing about keeping some blue up above us and some green on the ground. There's only one tomorrow, let's work on this. Let's pass it on down. So he had Randy Owen and the favorite son of DeKalb County at the time in his corner. So all of us would say, well, this should be a slam dunk. Bevel's been a congressman for 30 years. We should have this. It should be easy. Well, unfortunately, there were a lot of, just like today, anti-government guys and people up there, very anti. There were some people who probably want to keep it like it was so they could still commit crimes. You would not believe the opposition. For the first time in his 30-year career as a congressman, Tom Bevel was hung in effigy. Randy Owen was threatened on his porch, and his dog was threatened. The person said, I'm going to kill your dog. It was not a fun thing. And it looked like we weren't going to win. But there was a key, and in politics, it's really important to get that one person to make the decision. And I'm going to blow your mind. And my dear friend Pete Conroy, who is just I always tell people is that when you meet Pete, first of all, he cares deeply about the environment, but you also like him. He's not someone who's trying to really push something on you. He's there as a friend, and a friend who cares about the environment and who cares about nature. And so Pete took Richard Shelby it was like a Saturday morning. He took him to the canyon, and this was the pivotal thing. That afternoon, we were all going to be meeting at the DeKalb County Courthouse. And that's what I was doing. Half the room was mostly us folks from Birmingham, and half it was like Kill a Mockingbird. You know how the courtroom looks like? Half the room was the environmental folks, and the other half they were all in orange shirts. The bad guys, they all wore uniforms, and they were out to get us. And so we all hung in the courthouse there, and Shelby was a little late. And the reason he was a little late was that Pete Conroy and a couple of other people, but mainly Pete, was there to take Richard Shelby to the canyon. And this is a fellow that literally, and he was known to this about this, he would go to every county in the state of Alabama every year, and he had never been to the canyon. They took him to the canyon, and if any of y'all have been to the canyon lately, I can tell you exactly where they went. They went to Mill River Falls, and you saw the picture earlier. They went to Mill River Falls, and if you know where they now have the accessibility ramp. That's where they took them. But of course the ramp wasn't there. In fact, it was a little treacherous, what Pete told me. He reminded me of the story, and I checked it on him. And he, back then, the senators, unless you're Lamar Alexander, you all wore your coat and tie and everything like that. He said there he was walking down to the canyon, and he said, and Pete just said, "Do you want to put your feet in the water?" And he said, "I'll do a little bit." And so Shelby took his shoe off. He took one shoe off, and he took his sock off. And Pete tells me, he said, I got to tell you, that was the whitest foot I've ever seen in my life. And he said, and he literally put his foot in there. And Pete said it was like he was baptized. And the statement that Pete told me, you know, here you have the senator putting his foot in there, and he said, Senator, if your foot had eyes, it would need dark glasses. And what was wonderful is that he lifted his foot and he looked at Pete and he said, and this is literally Shelby's language. He said, I'm going to help you, not help. I'm going to help you, but I'm not going to leave you. But I'm going to help you. And Pete wanted to stress to me that it was help. We had that meeting at the courthouse. He got there, and I still remember the grin on Pete's face, and he just looked at me, and I went, and you know how there's little catty corners in the courthouses and stuff like that. And I went over to Pete and said, well, how was it? How was your visit? And Pete said, we got him. We're going to get it. And so he got in there, and Shelby looked at the opposition there, and he said, and we all had they let us talk a little bit and things like that. And then Shelby just stopped everybody in the middle of it and said, I am going to support this bill. I'm going to make sure certain things don't happen that you're afraid of. And you've got to trust me.
Oh, wow.
And if it weren't for that, he was the linchpin. We would never have had Little River Canyon National Preserve. But it took taking him down to the canyon, putting his foot that's never seen sun, and putting it in the water. We don't do that anymore.
Sometimes it just takes one person, doesn't it?
It just takes one, and then he had the power.
Mm-hmm.
And so, get one more. Got a couple more.
Okay.
These are gonna be a little bit quicker and everything, but again, we've got to tell our stories, but we not only have to tell our stories, we have to use our talents, and not the talents. I mean, gosh, we have brilliant scientists. We have a lot of wonderful folks, but we've got to make it real for people. And this is Francine Hutchinson, who is the mother of Duggar Mountain. If it weren't for Francine, we would never have had Duggar Mountain as a wilderness area. And she was incredible. What she did was she took children every day to the wilderness area, to the Duggar. And she also had a habit of just collecting every little thing she ever saw there. And fortunately, she worked at Jacksonville State. She doesn't have a doctorate. She doesn't have any, I think she might have a bachelor's, but she loved nature, and it was the sharing. And she was known as the person who cared about Duggar, and people loved her for it. It was her, and it is, she's still alive. It is her life passion. And I can't tell you how important it is to get our people in front of decision makers, and in front, and not just decision makers. Let's remember the children are decision makers too. And neighbors are decision makers. If we can convert everyone, not with the language that's up here about regulations and the rules and losing people, if we can convert people like Francine did, and that is going up to people and saying, let me tell you why Duggar is special. Let me tell you about the forest and the special things on this forest. That's how we win. That's how we win. Go on to the next one. Oh, and yeah, I'm sorry, back to Francine. I forgot to go back? Yeah, go back to her one quick. I'm sorry, one other quick thing about Francine.
That's okay.
One other thing we did though, and this is scary, and let me make this really clear. These things are scary, especially today. It's scary. We know people, they look at you and you have a Prius and they already, I'm against you. They look at you and say, you're environmentalist. I'm against you. You're not on my team. That's what it was like over around Duggar Mountain. This isn't Francine who did this, but we did this at the Alabama Environmental Council at the time. I had two staffers, two young men, Hendrick Snow, and many of y'all may know a guy named Ken Wills. And Ken Wills was from the area, and thank God he talked their language, which was wonderful. But there were 92, I remember this number, 92 adjacent landowners around the entire wilderness area. And people back then, they actually lived on the property and everything. And I ordered them both. I said, you go and you go see all 92 landowners, and you go see them, and you say, and you tell them, we want this wilderness area, and you try to knock down anything they have in opposition. And your job is to get them to sign this petition to say, I'm for it. They went to 97 properties, and they got 92 landowners to sign it.
Oh, amazing.
5, they just never were able to get. They were probably absentee landowners. Again, we don't win this battle of whatever we do, whether it's protecting Shades Creek or whatever we do. We don't win it sitting back and just telling people or talking. We have to make it personal. That's what we did. And it was wonderful because Alpha was against it, just so y'all know. Alpha was totally against. They just didn't want Duggar Mountain Wilderness. And it was wonderful because I was able to show them, well, and they said, the people up there don't want it. And I was able to say, BS, and plop it on the desk. You tell me, why would they put their John Hancock on this? So we got to do these kinds of things. These are tough. It's not easy. My last story is, this is Lynn Battle, who's a dear friend of mine. She's got lupus, and when she had her child Destiny, it was the greatest thing in her life, and she'll tell you that. And this was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And but Lynn is a single mom. She's got lupus. It's she's an artist, which means you don't make any money. And but she's one of the most remarkable people I know. And Lynn said, you know, she cared about the environment. She was a troublemaker, environmentalist like the rest of us. But what happened with Lynn, what really turned her on about the environment, what to do, was the issue of lead poisoning. And this was 25 years ago. Lead poisoning was a much bigger issue. I mean, it's still an issue today, but even much bigger back then. And she said, I got involved with lead. She told me this. I got involved with lead because I was in a doctor's office and I was reading, Red Book, you know how they would have the magazines in there, or Women's Day or something. And it had a story on lead poisoning. And she said, I read that. My daughter went into the doctor's room, and I asked, I just drilled the doctor with questions, and the doctor said, oh yeah, we're okay. I mean, he looked at her numbers. She had taken a blood test earlier. Her numbers are, and he looked at it and said, it's a 14 deciliters is what it's called. And Lynn looked at him and said, it's 14. And Lynn looked at her and said, yeah, well, the CDC says it's supposed to be 10. And the doctor, no. The Alabama guidelines is 15.
Oh, no.
And she just lost it. She said, my child is poisoned. And because the state of Alabama has less stringent rules and all that stuff. And I got to tell you, it was a beautiful thing because she could have left it at that. She learned how to reduce lead in the kids' system and things like that, taking spinach, having more iron and things like that. There is a way to remedy it a little bit. But she went further. She said, if this is happening here, this is happening all over the state of Alabama, it's happening in my community. And what she did, she made it personal again. She went to her legislator, and many of y'all may have heard of Senator Roger Smitherman. He's still a state senator, and he's a dear friend of mine too. But she went to Roger Smitherman, and she just brought her child and flopped her down there and just said, they're poisoning our children. We in the state of Alabama we allow 30% more lead than is allowable with pretty much any other kid in the country. And my kid's being poisoned. And what was beautiful was Smitherman listened. And he listened, and he took that, and he introduced legislation. He didn't know anything about lead, except from lead. But because of it, he did it. And the beautiful thing that happened was that I was called down there because I was helping Lynn on this too. And Lynn couldn't go down to Montgomery. I was called down, and Roger called me down and says, I've got a meeting with the head of public health. It was Don Williamson, who's now head of the Hospitals Association of the state of Alabama. And Don Williamson comes in, and he's just mad as a hornet. He said, Senator, first of all, he's talking straight to the senator. He knows who I am. And he knows that I'm responsible for, I was helping Roger about the lead rules. He said, Senator, this is all just, I don't know what you're being told, but our standards are as stringent as anyone. And I'm very proud to say, he says, we have less people who have lead poisoning than anyone else in the country. So why do you care about this? All right. And I'm sitting back going, and Roger's going and just points to me, and I look at Williamson, and I said, I respect you. I understand what you're talking about, but I think you'll see that our standard is not what CDC standard is, and is probably the reason why we have less poisoned people, quote unquote, statistically in the country, because our numbers are 30% allowable higher. And I still remember this is back when we didn't have cell phones, and it was wonderful because Williamson said, well, he said, we do have the CDC standard, and we were sticking to that. And he said, but I'm going to call them at our office. We're in the office, Smitherman's office. He takes the phone and he dials down there. He's getting the right person. And it was just one of the most wonderful sights to see. He's going, what's our level? What's the CDC level? Go and get that to me now. He's literally getting that. They're rushing around because he's saying, I want this now. I've got a senator in here and kill this bill. That's what his job was. He wanted to kill this bill. And Smitherman we're sitting there. I think Smitherman left, and I'm stuck with this guy who was sort of pissed at me. And it was something beautiful to see. Smitherman fortunately walked in when he saw this. He just goes, so what's the standard? Okay, because there's no speaker. All right. Puts the phone down, and then he goes, Senator, you can drop your legislation. He says, we will go through, and he's looking at me. He won't look at me. He's looking at the senator. He's so pissed at me. And he's looking, and he's going, Senator, we'll go through rulemaking as soon as possible to get the standard to 0.10 deciliter. And wow. And so and he did it. Of course, we didn't need a bill.
It can happen there. But with the right people.
The right people, but it all started with Lynn.
Yeah.
And it's because she took it and ran with it. One last picture.
Okay. Here we are.
Salamanders. Yeah, and this is and I want y'all to know this picture was taken. You can probably see it right there in the bottom.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
This was about when my daughter was about 6 years old. So protecting our natural heritage is in our hands. And I tell people nothing says for you guys, and especially I think especially in this community, nothing says community more than salamanders. And so I love what y'all do. You make it real. You make it important. And you're doing this already. I don't hear the language, the regulatory language and talking over people's heads and things like that. And I want y'all to know I've met city council people from Homewood and even people who are legislators but high up in the political realm. They care about the environment because of your organization.
Oh,
and
wow. That's amazing.
Well,
yeah, thank you.
And y'all don't know it, and that's fine. I shouldn't be telling you that then. But it's because of this little salamander.
Mm-hmm.
It's not you. I'm sorry.
No, it's the spotted salamander.
It's not you. What it is, but it is you. It is you. Because what you've done is you've taken a little critter and now you show everybody why it matters. And once they hold the salamander in their hands, they're not going to screw it up.
Their life changes, doesn't it? I mean, Jim Brown talks all the time about how the kids hold that and how they just kind of come to life.
Well, folks, that's my daughter's hands. I think she was 8. And she's a life. She sort of was going to be on this path anyway because of her father, but because of the salamander that sealed the deal. And you guys do that every day. And all I can say is keep it up. And if you can, try to make sure the message is that we don't win on the environment when we talk about the rules. We win on the environment when we talk about why it matters to you and why it matters to all of us as a community. Our community is so divided. All of our communities are divided these days. For God's sake, the environment's the one thing that unites us. And that's what we've got to do. And as the environmental community, we have just got to get out of, the bad guys want us to talk about the rules. We need to talk about why it matters. So that's my spiel, and you guys are doing it. I want to make sure, I want y'all to know that. And I can't tell you how much you carried it. If y'all haven't had a chance, I did write that piece last month, and just to give y'all some hope too. I really think it's those river groups that y'all's river groups. The river groups and groups protecting creeks are some of the best people. I talked to the name with the group with the greatest name in the history of conservation, the Dog River Clearwater Revival. And I talked to them, and they're everybody's a part of that. And then I talked to the pinch cut group in Trustful, and they're winning. I mean, the mayor of Trustful, he banned styrofoam of all things. A mayor, who ever knew of a Southern mayor banned styrofoam? But all they did was talk to them and say, "You see all that styrofoam? If we banned it, we wouldn't have the problem." But that's because they took them to the river to let them see it. So we can all do this. I know many of y'all on this call, and I just deeply appreciate being able to communicate this to you tonight. And that's my spiel.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so inspiring, Pat. Really inspiring talk about seeing where Alabama has been in the past. And I was not a resident of Alabama back in those days. I don't want to lose you. But that's really inspiring for us to hear that. And especially with the Salamander Festival coming up in 2 weeks, folks. It's coming quickly. And what you all can do is not only be there to help at the festival, but also let your neighbors and friends and kids and anyone you know come out and come to the festival and hold a salamander. Jim Brown will be there with his salamanders to hold.
So I know it probably took more of a minute, but are there any questions anybody have or anything?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you.
Let's take some questions.
This is James Lowry. It's not a question, but I was at that meeting with Shelby about Little River Canyon. And two things that I remember from was Alabama Power being there, and also that Shelby was a Democrat and then later became a Republican. So, but yeah, it was an interesting meeting.
Yeah, you remember it was us against them, remember?
Exactly.
I still, one thing I remember, I'm never, I'm really, it may not seem like it, but I usually don't talk back at people. I'm not quick enough to, but I remember one of the people was on the other side was talking when I was talking, and I think I looked at her and said, "I'm talking now. I have the floor." And I usually don't do that. And I think I was so, number one, nervous but upset. But but that was, do you remember, James, how he actually told them what they didn't want to hear?
Yeah. Yep.
And
Alabama Power just knew they were going to carry the day. I mean, it came across that way.
Well, Alabama Power was going to get the money. And I didn't tell y'all this. What is Little River Canyon like today? I mentioned to y'all it's the highest crime area. Back then it was. Today it's the lowest crime area.
What a turnaround.
And today it's also, they have over 500,000 visitors. 500,000. They haven't wrecked the place. And the reason why they haven't is because when we got the national park designation, we were able to go to ADEM and say, now you have to make it an ONRW, the river, which means there are no discharges in the river. So because of the national park designation, there are now no discharges, direct discharges, obviously, into the river. So that was another thing that came out of it that nobody knows about.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure the property has really escalated in that area. People want to live there because of the protection of a canyon. That, and you also just got to pray, if you've ever been there, you know how some idiot put right on the rim, a big McMansion. But and that was the one place that they didn't quite carve out. Yeah. Any other questions?
Hey, Pat, I got a question for you. You've been part of quite a few success stories that have left a big legacy on the state of Alabama. Are there any near misses? Anything that you didn't get accomplished, or you wish had gone through that would have a chance to come back around?
Oh gosh, good God. I don't know if there's near misses, but I will tell you one thing we don't do again, and this is something the conservation movement really needs to focus on. When I was on the Environmental Management Commission, I was the first quote unquote environmentalist put on there since Cameron Val had been on there, and she had been off it for about 10 years. We do crap. I mean, we don't even try to put our people into positions where we can make an impact with state government. I mean, I'm sorry, we do try with Forever Wild. Nature Conservancy has some votes. I mean, has a way to appoint people. But other than that, there's not one environmental group that's trying to get commissioners on the Environmental Management Commission. Pete Conroy lobbied and worked on getting me on the Environmental Management Commission. That got me sued and got me in trouble because I was voted down 6-1 all the time. But hey, I always loved, people went up to me and they said, don't you want to be reappointed? And I said, I'm not here to be reappointed. I'm here to do my job. I don't care about being reappointed. That's not in my decision making. So things we should do. God, there's so many things. I mean, we really just need this. And here's the difference. Everybody, and I knew we were going to talk about probably the Moody landfill situation. Yeah. The reason ADEM doesn't succeed is because literally they need people on the commission who are going to say, when the next meeting of LaFleur, the commissioner there, I mean, the directors, they need to stand up and say, what the hell? Why are you sitting on your hands and letting something happen for a month and a half, now 2 months almost? And that's what drove Jim Moore out. And when you have one person just asking the questions, the other commissioners are going to go, yeah, what the hell? And that's how we got a majority to fire Jim Moore back then, is that they actually got involved. It used to be, when I got in there, it was amazing, because when I got in there, it was pretty much the ADEM would tell us what to do, and we voted it, what they told us what to do. And I remember raising my hand and saying, let me ask some questions. And they all went, what? We're not going to get out of here in 20 minutes? We're going to have to get out of here in an hour, maybe 2 hours? You know, I looked at it, I drove down here, I'm here. So that's, I wish we haven't settled, we haven't done that. One other thing, Attorney General's office, you asked Paul questions, I've got to answer. We used to meet with the Attorney General's office every month or 2 months. And many of y'all may have heard of Ann Tate, and she's still around. God, she brought everyone together, and we would meet with the Attorney General's office, and we talk about their cases, environmental cases. And because of what we were doing, we were forcing them to deal with the environment. We had Jeff Sessions and Bill Pryor, who both, you would say, they call them environmentalists, and we had them doing great things for us. Heck, Jeff Sessions did, the relationship we created with Jeff Sessions helped us get Duggar Mountain, but it also helped us get, I don't know if y'all know this, he sponsored legislation for the Cahaba National Wildlife Refuge and the Mountain Longleaf National Wildlife Refuge. Jeff Sessions.
Wow.
But we did it because we created the relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what we could do now, Paul, policy-wise, except I can tell you, we need to turn this stuff around. We need to go down the legislature. We need to take them out on the river and get their feet wet, and hopefully not get blinded by the, you know, untanned feet.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions out there?
I saw some applause. So on behalf of everybody from Friends of Shade Creek, and I thank you very much, Pat, for a thoughtful presentation and for everything you've done. And you know, don't be afraid to bring your children and your other friends out to the Friends of Shade, to the Salamander Festival later this month, and get a fresh set of hands on some salamanders. We'll have them there for you.
Yeah.
We got a whole bunch of 20-something that be him now. I'm going to have to bring them all.
Yeah, bring them. Bring them.
And my daughter, fortunately, is up in college, but she's here till the 22nd. So unfortunately, she's going to miss it. But
at least she was there when she was in there.
She was.
Yeah.
There's proof. Her hand. Y'all will love this little thing. I found that picture and I showed it. She actually pulled this together for me, the PowerPoint, and she saw that picture and she said, "Those are my hands, aren't they?" And I said, "Yes, they are."
That's great. Well, Pat, we so appreciate everything that you have done here in Alabama. And I just feel like here I am sitting with one of the most important people of the Alabama environmental movement. It just sort of makes my heart, makes me so proud to be here. And that, and we're having the Salamander Festival to bring people together and to learn more about the environment. And that makes me proud too. So thank you so much for being here and telling us the stories and getting us inspired, and really good timing right before the festival.
Great.
So if there's no other questions, we'll let you all go.